My name's Toby Bragg. I am the baker at the Bakehouse, which is a social enterprise cafe and soon-to-be micro-bakery in Devonport, Plymouth. We're located underneath the Devonport Guildhall. I've been asked today to show you a little bit of bread making, and I think what puts a lot of people off about bread making a lot of the time is the fuss and the mess, and particularly the effort involved in kind of kneading bread, and people think it takes a long time and you have to be very, very involved, and it's a really messy process. So I'm actually going to show you a simple way to make a bread which is really easy to make at home today, a focaccia. And the great thing about this method that we're going to use today is that you can do it all without getting too messy. We're not going to get involved in a complicated, long kneading process. Focaccia is generally something that scares a lot of people in the making of bread because it's a very, very wet dough. It's a very loose dough. But I'm going to show you, hopefully today, how we can use that to our advantage and actually make it nice and simple to make bread. So focaccia can be topped in a number of ways. We've got some simple classic toppings here, some fresh rosemary, some chopped garlic, black olives, and obviously some delicious extra virgin olive oil that's going to give a lovely, rich kind of flavor to it. So without further ado, I'm going to launch into it and show you how we're going to do it. So I've got two bowls here, just one for our main mixing bowl and one which is for the water, just to show you the mix and everything. I'm going to talk about the main ingredients that go into all bread, really, and then talk specifically about our focaccia. We're going to use a flour which is a strong bread flour, a baker's bread flour. This is, focaccia is quite a fine white bread, so we're using a plain white flour. You can make a whole wheat focaccia. It may come out just a little bit denser than you're expecting from a white one, but it's still just as delicious and obviously a little bit more wholesome for you as well. So I'd encourage you to try all sorts of different things in your baking and try the different flours, try the different textures. But for focaccia, we want a good, strong flour. So the bonds in the gluten are good. So it's going to hold those air bubbles in, and all that kind of yeast activity, all the gases that the yeast are releasing are going to get trapped there in the dough. So we get a really light, airy texture to the dough. And then to that normal dough, we're going to add a bit of olive oil, which softens the crumb and also adds a great crisp texture to the outside of the focaccia as well, give it its distinctive texture and flavor. So I've got here 600 grams of strong white bread flour. I'm just going to put that straight into our big mixing bowl here. So, make a bit of a mess. Just move that out of the way. Now, I always say the most important ingredient, the main primary ingredients in bread, there's 5 of them. One is flour, one is water, one is a little bit of salt, because without that, bread tends to taste a little bit just like cavity wall insulation. And the other one, which people often forget, is thyme. Now, I'm not talking about the herb thyme. I'm just talking about allowing the bread time to ferment, because bread is obviously is a fermented good. It needs that time to kind of prove up, and for the yeast and the other bacteria that are in bread to do their work, to kind of change it to something which is going to be really delicious and good and wholesome to eat. Now, with the focaccia that we've got here, you can make it over an extended period of time, but usually a few hours at home is enough so that you can actually kind of get the thing fully proved up and risen properly. Focaccia, because it's quite a wet dough, it provides a very liquid environment for the dough for the yeast to get active in, and the yeast actually likes that. It gets very, very busy in that kind of wet dough activity. So you'll see often a lot quicker, a lot more activity going on in the dough, a lot faster than you would with a sort of very dry, normal bread dough that you might use to make a loaf. So basically, I've got here 480 of water. I'm going to take a half a teaspoon of salt. Now, I generally, with focaccia, because we often top focaccia with flaked sea salt, which I'm going to do again today, we don't want to use too much salt, so we can reduce that salt level right down, because you're going to add extra salt to the topping as well. Now, we want to watch our salt, obviously, what we're doing here, but focaccia has a very distinctive flavor from that salt on the topping, so we're going to use some flaked salt on the topping. But as a result, I'm just going to reduce right down the salt that I'm actually going to put in. So far, I've got 600 grams of strong white bread flour. I've got a half a teaspoonful of salt. And to that, we need to mix our liquids together. So I've got 480 of water. Now, it's going to be a little bit more active. Now, you can use cold water straight from the tap. That's fine. But the yeast will be more active at a slightly higher temperature. So if we basically mix up, we can basically add... usually a good way to do it is to add 1 part boiled water to 3 parts cold water from the tap. And then you usually end up with something which is round about sort of around about 27 to 30 degrees. And that's ideal for kind of getting the dough started and getting the yeasts really active. Now, there's obviously 3 types of yeast. There's baker's block yeast, which you don't really see in the supermarkets, but we bakers generally use, which is a fresh live version of yeast. And the 2 that you often see in the supermarket here is an active dried, which often comes in a tin, and your standard kind of packet fast action yeast. Now, a lot of people don't realize, but there is a primary difference between these 2 yeasts. This is basically just yeast on its own with nothing else in it. And this one here is basically yeast with an active agent in it. So it's going to be something like vitamin C, which is there to kind of help accelerate the process on. So it really depends whether you want to add kind of extra stuff to your dough. I actually like using this stuff because it is just yeast and nothing else. But for today, because it's the most commonly used, we're going to use one of these sachets and just pop that in. And because it's very, very fine granules, that can go straight in with your flour, and you can just mix it in with your flour and salt to combine that all together. I'm throwing flour already all over the place here. So I've got my warm water here. I'm going to be able to add that straight to the dough. And to that warm water, I'm going to add 50 grams of extra virgin olive oil, a good tasty extra virgin olive oil. And that's going to add some richness, some flavor to the dough. And it's also going to soften the crumb to make it like a nice soft texture in the middle of the focaccia. And I can basically take that liquid and pop it straight into the bowl here. Now, I'm not often a fan of telling people to go out and invest in kitchen equipment, but one thing which is very, very useful, and you're going to need to actually make your focaccia today, is a very simple, flexible dough scraper. These cost about £1.50 from any good baking shop, and it is a really, really useful tool when you're baking in the kitchen. I'm basically going to use that to shape my focaccia, but if you haven't got one of these, don't let that deter you. Here's one that I kind of made just by cutting the top out of an ice cream tub. Just snip around, and you can make something which is a perfectly good, flexible dough scraper that will do the work for you. So don't let that prevent you from making your focaccia. So I'm going to take my dough scraper and just make sure, after throwing all that on my t-shirt, I'm going to make sure that all of that lovely extra virgin olive oil is kind of pushed down into the bowl here. And this is where it starts to get different from what you might be expecting from your normal bread making. You can all see into the bowl, I take it from here. So rather than, I want to mix all these in and combine all the ingredients together as quickly as I can now. So I'm going to swish all of this around. I'm going to cut into the dough, and you'll see that liquid starts to kind of go into the flour. And then what happens is, as it starts to go in, you want to take your dough scraper and just smear it around the bowl like that. So I'm just literally smearing all of that in, rubbing all of that water so that the flour can pick up all the moisture that's in there and spread that throughout the dough. Now, one thing which is a piece of advice which is often said is that most recipes you see for bread will tell you to combine the ingredients together, and a lot of traditional recipes will say to then knead it for 10 or 20 minutes. Now, in my experience, I've always found that it takes a certain amount of time for the flour to pick up those liquids and actually hydrate itself. And so that's a good kind of 5 to 10 minutes, at least, that you want to leave that dough to just sat. So long as you've mixed it thoroughly, so long as you've combined that all in together thoroughly, then basically you should have a dough which is already starting to sort of work and already starting to improve itself for you. The yeast will be beginning to wake up and go to work. You'll have all that flour soaking up the moisture and the oils in there, starting to enrich that dough and kind of make it ready to carry on. Now, as you'll see from that, if I was to turn that out onto the work surface here, you will probably find that it was going to be a bit messy. But we're not even going to let this come out of the bowl. We're going to leave it in the bowl here. And all I'm going to do is, and I hope you can see this from above, is I'm going to take my bowl scraper, tuck it under the edge of the dough, and just lift it and fold it over. Now, I probably need to get my hand in here to show you how this is very sort of wet and sticky dough. And you'll find at the moment that this is going to be sort of very easily, it tears, chunks will come off of it. But after about 5 or 10 minutes, it will get a lot more kind of stretchy. And even in the time that I'm doing this here, I'm already starting to see that the dough is beginning to kind of stretch. And if I paddle that dough more, if I kind of work it a little bit now, once it's hydrating a little bit, you will find that that's starting to develop the gluten in the flour. That's starting to improve it and get those bonds together already. So already I'm seeing a change in that dough. It's starting to become a little bit more stretchy. And if I lift it up now, you'll start to see that it will start to stretch and hold itself together. And the longer you leave that, the longer that will improve. So what I'm going to do, rather than kneading the dough, we're just going to lift and fold it over. So all I do is I take my dough scraper, tuck it under one corner, and then lift it over the top. Rotate the bowl. You all see this all right? Can you all see it? And then tuck the dough scraper under, lift it, throw it over the top. Again, just keep rotating the bowl, tuck, lift, so you're stretching the dough upwards and then just folding it over on itself. Stretch, fold it over. And what you'll see is that now what's starting to happen is the dough is starting to kind of hold itself together a little bit more. So what was a real incohesive, gloopy, sticky mass is actually already starting to kind of come together. So I'm going to take that. Once I've done that for a few minutes and I feel that the dough's starting to kind of improve itself, what we're going to do is cover that bowl with a little bit of plastic. So I'm going to take a plastic sheet, or you can use like an old carrier bag. I find it's very useful, those kind of plastic carrier bags you get from the supermarket. Tuck that over your bowl and then set that aside in a warm place to prove up. So it doesn't have to be like a really hot place, but what you'll find is that the time it takes is going to be set by the temperature that the room is in. So if it's a little bit warmer, the yeast is going to be a little bit active. With focaccia, we want lots of activity. We want the yeast to be kind of like nice and busy. So we want to set that somewhere warm so it's coming like that. So a warm kitchen is going to be fine. If you haven't got a warm kitchen, a good little trick is to just take a big pan, run some tap water into a pan and just set your bowl over a pan of warm tap water, and that will provide some warmth to the dough. But you've got to remember to kind of not to have it too hot, because we don't want all the yeast activity. And it's important to remember that above a certain temperature, yeast is killed off. So we don't want to kill the yeast off. So slower and lower temperature for a longer time is better. It improves the flavor in the bread. But if we want to make the focaccia in a reasonable length of time, then we're going to use some warm water and set that in a warm place. So if I put that into a bowl and leave it for about an hour, you're going to come back to something that looks roughly like this. Now, can you all see that? You see it's puffed up. Now, my fingers are going to stick to the dough if I touch it now, because it's still very, very sticky. So I don't want to mess around with that too much. Now what I'm going to do is transfer that focaccia dough to a pan, which is where we're going to bake it. So I'm going to take myself a sheet pan, nice sheet pan, and I'm going to line that with a little drizzle of olive oil. So I'm just going to pop that on here and then rub that around the bowl. So I'm covering that. My hands are a little bit doughy. See if I can find a cloth to just wipe those down. Just rub that around the bowl, so you line the whole bowl with olive oil, so that is going to stop your focaccia from sticking to the pan. I mean, non-stick pan's going to help even more if you've got a non-stick pan, but still make sure you pop some of that in there. Now my nice useful dough scraper again, to prevent myself from getting messy hands, I'm just going to go into the bowl. You can probably see me tucking in behind the dough again, and I'm just going to pop that all out right into the middle of that sheet pan. So take the whole lot out and just pop it straight into the pan like that. So basically what I've got now is a big blob of focaccia dough on that, and that's going to be really stretchy. Now I want to make that spread out so it covers the pan evenly. So what I'm going to do is, to prevent my fingers sticking to it, I'm just going to give it a good drizzle of olive oil over the top, and then I'm going to get a little bit of olive oil on my fingers as well, so that that's not going to actually stick to the dough. And then I'm going to use my hand spread like that, and I'm just going to dimple the surface of the dough and try and spread it out in the pan. If you're brave enough, you can even try and lift it and stretch it a little bit. But because you've got an oily pan, and that dough has a certain elasticity, it's going to try and pull back on itself. So you won't be able to, in one go, just spread that out over the whole surface of the pan. So I'll be able to do it like this, and then what you'll probably find is that you have to set that aside for 5 minutes, come back to it, and then dimple the dough again and stretch it out. Do it a little bit more, and it will relax, and then you come back again, set it for another 5 minutes, and when you come back, after a few times, that will have spread nicely on the whole of the pan. Then what you do is just set it, put it back in your warm place, and leave it for maybe probably another half an hour, 20 minutes, half an hour, for that to fully prove up. And hopefully what you will end up with is something which looks a little bit like this. That's the same quantity of dough that we've got in here, and it's spread out to cover the whole of the pan now. And it's started to rise up. All that yeast's been really, really busy in it. You've got all those great kind of indentations and mottles and air bubbles that you can see, and we want to actually preserve those. We don't want to knock them out the dough. For focaccia, we want that open texture to the bread. We want that lightness that comes in it. So I've got that ready, and all I'm going to do is dress it now. It's ready to to be prepared. The trick with focaccia is don't go too mad with the toppings, don't overload it too much. So I'm just going to put some classic focaccia toppings on here. I've got some lovely fresh rosemary, and the way I like to do it is to just pull off little spears of rosemary and then poke them in. Just literally kind of break some bits off and shove them into the dough. And you can actually go and just kind of pop these in. And that will give you some lovely flavor. Like all that, I can smell that fresh rosemary now, and it just smells absolutely gorgeous. So I pop all those in here. So I'm going to cover my focaccia fully with interesting toppings. So I'm just going to stop there before I spend all day doing that. I've got some olives, so let's put a few of those in. So if I get some nice black olives here, we're going to chuck some of those. Just pop them into the dough a little bit, let them set into the dough. That way they'll sit into the dough, and it'll be a nice little surprise when you bite into it. Find a lovely black olive in there. What else have I got? I've got some lovely caramelized, not caramelized onion, some lightly sweated red onion. The reason that we cook it off slightly is because that stops it scorching when it goes into the onion. So here's some that I just really sort of fried it off very lightly, and I'm going to pop that on because that's nice. That's going to add an extra bit of flavor in there. And then I got some chopped garlic. Oh, that's always good. When it goes in the oven, you'll get the smell of that. That smells fantastic. And to that, a little drizzle of balsamic vinegar. It's always interesting, a little bit more flavor. I'm going to add a bit more olive oil, because then you get the olive oil pool up on the bread. And that, again, when it bakes off all that olive oil, so you get those lovely little pockets around where the olives are, really rich taste of the extra virgin olive oil. Now, you can use a lighter olive oil for this, but I really like olive oil with a lot of flavor. It's a little bit more extravagant, but it produces a bread which is really, really tasty, really, really rich. So finally, on top of that, I'm just going to take some really nice flaked sea salt, and I'm just going to pop that over the top of the focaccia. Just kind of chuck that through like that, and not too much. We don't want to go too mad with it, but we want that kind of lovely sort of salt flavor that comes in, and a little twist of black pepper here, and then that will be all ready to go into the oven. So basically, we'll take that and pop that into a hot oven. You want to preheat your oven at 220 degrees C. And pop it straight in. Usually probably on the top shelf's all right, but keep an eye on it. We don't want it. What you're looking for is a focaccia which is going to be nicely risen and has a nice golden texture on the top, but is cooked right the way through. Because it's in the pan, it shouldn't take too long to cook, so we usually find sort of around about 10 to 20 minutes, depending on your oven and how good it is. You may need to bake it a little bit longer, but what I'm looking to produce is something a little bit like this, which is one we baked off this morning. Unfortunately, because we're in a little bit of a hurry here today, we don't have the chance to kind of prove everything up fully and bake it all off. So, as I say, about 10 to 20 minutes to kind of to bake it off. You may, depending on your oven, but fan oven usually around about 10 to 20 minutes, somewhere in that region. But you just want to make sure that it looks like that, nicely baked across the top. You've got all of that olive oil providing richness to it. And if I tear into this, you will see it's got a lovely open texture there. If you can see the crumb, I don't know if anyone can see that. I know we've got some we can hand around if anyone wants to try some of this later. We've got plenty here. We've got some samples. So if you want to try the focaccia, or come on down to Colin Bakehouse and sample our focaccia there as well. So it's a really light, open texture, and most importantly, it's really easy to do. It's not messy. It doesn't involve lots of work kneading the whole time. You can do it basically in a bowl and a pan and bake it off at home. It's a great bread to use for kind of brunch and treats. You can even make sweet focaccias, top it with chocolate chips or honey and olive oil. There's any number of things that you can do with it, but it's really easy to do at home, and it's a great way to get making bread. So my name's Toby Bragg. Hopefully that's going to be a nice introduction to you all to maybe think about trying something like this at home. But if not, come down and see us at Colin Bakehouse, where we have baking courses. We can kind of teach you how to make focaccia there. So thanks very much.